Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Alder Lake is here, Intel's 12th generation of the Core i series of CPUs. Now there's a name that just rolls right off the tongue, isn't it? Thankfully, the CPUs themselves are impressive. Today, we're going to compare the 5 CPUs from Intel and AMD, the i5-12600K and the Ryzen 5 5600X in both gaming and non-gaming tests. At the end of the video, I'm going to share some specific purchase and upgrade recommendations for both CPUs. As I noted, the 12th generation from Intel is quite impressive, bringing more new features than I could possibly fit into this video. Today is all about the benchmarks, so if you'd like a detailed overview of the new features of Alder Lake, from the hybrid CPU cores to DDR5, PCI Express 5, to the new core design that brings a boost to instructions per clock cycle, finally, check out the Alder Lake overview video linked in the video description below. It is 30 minutes of time-stamped detail on the 12th generation launch. The short version is this. 12th Gen is finally the first mainstream desktop CPU from Intel not on the 14nm process that we've been on since the 5th generation Broadwell from 2014.
It's been 84 years.
This is 10nm enhanced superfin, also known as the new Intel 7 process, which I'm sure has absolutely nothing to do with wanting to sound competitive with TSMC's 7nm process. Hybrid CPUs are here, more commonly known as big.LITTLE, which ARM actually launched a decade ago for the mobile space. There are P-cores and E-cores, which stand for performance and efficiency, respectively. The P-cores have a higher IPC, have hyperthreading, and have a higher clock speed than the E-cores at the cost of higher power consumption. The i5-12600K has 6 P-cores and 4 E-cores, for a total of 10 cores and 16 threads. Intel's new thread director works with Windows 11 to help put foreground processes on the P-cores and background processes on the E-cores. Now, Windows 11 is not required for Alder Lake, but in practice, that's probably where you need to be, at least until Linux gets updated. DDR5 RAM support is new. However, it is not required as DDR4 motherboards do exist, and currently the price gap means that DDR4 makes much more sense at the moment. PCI Express 5 is also making its debut here, however, only for the GPU. The rest of the platform is Gen 4. Now, the i5-12600K also comes in a KF version, which is the exact same CPU without the integrated graphics for $20 less. The K chip is currently selling for $320, and the KF chip is selling for $300 even at Newegg at the time of writing. Many other new improvements have been made as well, which are covered in that detailed video linked down below. The Ryzen 5 5600X has been reviewed multiple times, so briefly, it consists of 6 Zen 3 cores and SMT, AMD's version of hyperthreading, for a total of 12 threads. It installs in any B550 or X570 motherboard, most 400 series, and a small handful of 300 series boards with varying degrees of restrictions and support based upon the board in question. It has an MSRP of $299, however, it has been on sale for closer to $250 at various points in 2021. There are no integrated graphics on the 5600X. However, AMD sells a slightly slower CPU called the 5600G that does contain onboard graphics in exchange for a slightly slower speed. First, we have 10 games to show you. After that, we'll go over the non-gaming benchmarks. Please note, these two test benches are not directly comparable due to the RAM differences. I do not yet have a DDR4 motherboard for the Intel platform, so Intel was tested with DDR5 and AMD was tested with DDR4. Second, due to the Windows 11 AMD bug that is still causing issues, the AMD chip was tested with Windows 10, all the latest updates installed, while Intel was tested on Windows 11, again, all updates installed. I will list the specific hardware used for both of these platforms down in the video description below. Very important note, We are testing the games today at 1440p high detail, which I am well aware will cause some comments in the comment section below. Why? Well, because I think it's quite silly to build an all-new PC in 2021, put an RTX 3080 on it, and then run them at 1080p. It's nice from a theory testing point of view, but I don't think it's reality, and I prefer testing in configurations that I actually think new system builders today are more likely to run. Finally, it is worth reminding everybody that benchmarking games on perfectly set up and clean test benches with nothing running in the background in an ideal environment is only reflective of that specific configuration. Stick a second monitor on your PC, multitask, have 8 things running in the test tray, and more CPU becomes useful really quickly. The game tests you're about to see are really only testing the 6P cores on the i5-12600K, with 1 or 2 exceptions in there. There is no load or demand for the E-cores in general in built-in benchmarks in games. Keep that in mind and consider noting the multitasking performance of the non-gaming tests if you're curious how well each CPU will live stream to Twitch while gaming, run multiple monitors, or otherwise do more than one thing at a time on your computer. First up, we have Anno 1800, a strategy game that is both pretty and demanding at the same time. Both CPUs run the built-in benchmark very well. The GPU is the main limitation here, a point you'll see more than once during these tests. If you have one monitor and your PC just plays games, frankly, either of these CPUs will do that job. The i5 does get 186 frames per second average, while the Ryzen 5 gets 192. Interestingly enough, across all my testing, these two CPUs trade places in gaming more than you'd think. More on that later. The split is repeated on the 1% low, 133 for the i5, 138 for the Ryzen 5. Next up, we have Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It is not new, however, it does offer us the chance to compare performance across 2 different versions of the same game line, as Valhalla is next. Average frame rate isn't all that different here. However, if you look at the CPU usage, you'll notice the 5600X is using a higher percentage of the CPU than the 12600K is. This is reflected in the 1% low number being far more different between the two. The 5600X averages 107, while the 12600K hits 112. Not a major difference. For sure, one not that you're going to notice outside of a benchmark. However, moving on the 1% low, you can see the 12600K is 42% faster than the 5600X. This is reflected in the frame time graph, which I'll show you here in slow motion, zoomed in so you can see the difference between a 6-core CPU and a 10-core CPU in a game that will really use the cores. Please note this does not make it unplayable on the 5600X, far from it. However, it is going to be a smoother experience on the 12600K. Moving on to the newest game in the series, Valhalla runs well on both CPUs. However, we do see a difference in the average frame rate. Even watching the real-time performance, you can see a small difference, but when we come to the chart, it becomes more clear. 81 frames per second average on the 5600X versus 95 frames per second on the 12600K. Not quite a 20% improvement, however, it's not a rounding error either. This is the future of AAA games, both high-performance cores and lots of them. AMD will fire back to be sure, but for now, Intel wins this one hands down. Next up, we have Borderlands 3, a great example of a game that is hard to run because of GPU demands, but at least when it comes to the benchmark, not really that hard to run from the CPU's point of view. This is a good example of how the phrase, quote, "it depends" comes into play. Game selection is everything. On some games, it really does matter and you need all the CPU, and on other games, it's simply less important. 135 versus 130 on the average, 107 versus 108 on the 1% lows. These are rounding errors and mean the CPU didn't matter in this test. F1 2020 is next, and yes, I'm aware F1 2021 is already out. However, I started testing with 2020 before then, and sometimes it makes sense to use a game for more than a hot minute before moving on to the next slightly newer version. As you can see here, the frame rates are silly at over 300 frames per second average and over 200 in the 1% low. Instead of F1 2021, I'm actually testing Dirt 5 for the upcoming GPU comparison for this very reason. Far Cry New Dawn is next. And again, I know Far Cry 6 is out. It just released. I will add it to the test suite on the next cycle. So how does the full price DLC to Far Cry 5 stand up here? AMD actually does a little better, partly due to Far Cry being an AMD featured title, partly due to its age. It cares less about cores. 135 versus 139 in the average, 94 versus 103 in the 1% lows, both impressive results, both completely playable on either CPU. Ghost Recon Breakpoint. This is a game I have way too many hundreds of hours into playing personally, and I can tell you from experience, it eats cores for breakfast. This game is one of the reasons I upgraded my personal gaming PC at home from an i7-8700K to an i9-9900K to remove frame stutter in this game when in the jungle. Now you wouldn't think so from the results here with both CPUs nearly at 200 frames per second on the average. However, once you get into real combat attacking an enemy base, you're really going to start to notice the difference in terms of 1% lows and smoothness. Even my i9-9900K still stutters at times, and having played this game on a Ryzen 9 5900X, it's noticeably smoother there when you really get into it. Put the benchmarks aside for a second. If you want to play new open-world AAA games, buy all the CPU you can afford. You'll use it more than you think, and it's the frame times, open-world dynamic loading, large enemy engagements where the differences really become telling. Horizon Zero Dawn. This game is GPU bound here as there is little difference between either CPU. Another example of it depends when it comes to answering the question, does CPU choice matter for gaming? Exactly the same 137 frame rate on the average and within the margin of error on the 1% low. The Division 2 follows this up with more of the same, exactly the same 176 on both CPUs average frame rate and 131 versus 133 on the 1% low, another difference within the margin of error. However, as interesting as that is not, let me show you some live gameplay footage on both CPUs. The left side of your screen is the 5600X, the right side is the 12600K. Now, at first glance, they might seem identical, other than the fact that live gameplay is never going to look the same, of course, because that's just how live gameplay is. However, look at the frame time graphs. The 5600X is not as completely smooth as the 12600K is. Now, it's not bad. Frankly, it's perfectly playable. However, this game is 3 years old, so I'd hope it plays well on a 6-core CPU. Will the Division 3 do the same? Only time will tell. Finally, that brings us to Watch Dogs Legion, a much newer game than The Division 2, and it shows. Not massively, mind you, and not even in the recorded footage. However, once we see the chart, you can see there is a trend that is clear. In this case, it's not core count because neither CPU was overloaded, rather it's an IPC or per core performance. Here you're seeing the faster speed of the i5 make a difference, a minor one all things considered. Just a friendly reminder, this is a built-in benchmark. Open world gameplay typically gets more choppy. You can probably guess which CPU I think is best for AAA games. Here is a chart with all 10 games laid out, allowing you to see in one place how everything looks. First, this is the average frame rate chart, and as you can see, most of it is a difference without distinction. The numbers are all so close to each other, it would be easy to write all of this off as meaningless. To be fair, it is. If you're playing games on a clean test PC with one monitor and everything shut down and unloaded, Windows updates are disabled, antivirus was disabled, OneDrive is closed, GeForce Experience was closed. These were fresh installs of Windows running on an open-air test bench in a cool, air-conditioned room. The drivers are clean, the desktop is empty, the task tray only had MSI Afterburner and the game launcher in it. Remember, the footage you're seeing was recorded on an external PC using a hardware capture card, not on the test benches. So yes, unless this is your configuration, your results will vary. Here is the chart with all 10 games averaged together. To be honest, I'm tempted to stop testing games completely on CPU tests unless it's to compare old versus new CPUs with a real IPC difference. What I can tell you is that when updating games, downloading games, setting up Windows, installing drivers, that's where you start to notice the difference. Also, the minute I start doing more than one thing at a time, the i5 becomes noticeably more responsive than the Ryzen 5 thanks to its higher core count. Okay, enough about games. Clearly, for 95% of the games that exist in the whole world, either of these CPUs is fine. The i5 is better, but not by so much as to make the Ryzen 5 5600X useless. More on that in my recommendations at the end of the video. First, let's show some basic performance testing, starting with CPU Z-Bench. This is an easy-to-run, free program that you can use to get a reality check on your PC's performance and see if it's doing what it should. The i5 scores very well here at 763 points on the single-core score versus 636 on the 5600X. That's 20% faster at about the same clock speed, so it does appear that Intel's boast of 19% higher instructions per clock cycle is, in fact, true. It's even faster in multi-threaded testing, which makes sense. It has 10 cores after all. At over 7,000 points, the 12600K is 45% faster than the 5600X at under 5,000 points. I've read many comments online referring to the E-cores as fake cores or baby cores. They clearly aren't as powerful as P-cores, however, they aren't that far behind based on this result. Moving on to Cinnebench R20, the i5 single-core score is 22% faster than the Ryzen 5, and the multi-core score is a whopping 53% faster. 10 cores is 66% more than 6 cores. Considering the E-cores are A, not hyper-threaded, and B, run at a much slower clock speed, and C, are not as advanced, this is amazing. To anyone who wants to claim that Intel isn't putting real cores in Alder Lake, well, you can go jump in the lake. 7-zip is a great multi-threaded test of a real workload. However, it's also very memory constrained, making it hard to compare between DDR4 and DDR5 platforms. Even more so considering that this is my first ever DDR5 platform and only DDR5 RAM kit that I have. So all I can say is that the combined score is 10% faster on the Intel chip. Either 7-zip needs to be updated, or it might be the CL40 latency on the DDR5 that I'm using, or perhaps Windows 11 updates are required. Regardless, it's faster, but not by all that much, and it doesn't actually feel like it's using all 10 cores very well, at least in this test. The Blender benchmark has the benefit of being a long, real-world test using 6 different rendering scenes to get a solid result. In this case, the 12600K was 36% faster than the 5600X. Less of a difference than Cinnebench and CPU-Z, however, this may also partly be the limitation of the DDR5 4800 CL40 RAM that I'm using. I can't know one way or the other for sure until I get some faster RAM. First, the conclusions, my thoughts on these CPUs, and a few things to keep in mind before I get to specific purchase recommendations. The i5-12600K is simply the superior CPU in all respects, ignoring price and platform cost. The few games where the 5600X beats it are rounding errors and due more to the platform and OS differences. And frankly, one other key difference that is harder to judge but is still here. The Ryzen 5 5600X is a mature, stable, solid platform that has all the kinks worked out of it along with all the performance it's ever going to have. My issue with it is price. I find the lower cost 5600G to be a far better value. If AMD lowers the price of the 5600X to $199, I will be recommending it. The i5-12600K, however, is brand new everything. Brand new process, new RAM, new chipset, new core design, new hybrid design, new PCI Express version, new version of Windows, all rolled into one. Because so much of it is new, there are going to be hiccups in the early months that will get ironed out with time, but this does mean that the performance gap will only grow as games, software, and Windows 11 learns to better use the new hybrid CPU design, the new core design, and as DDR5 gets better. The 5600X beats the i5-12600K in Anno 1800, for example, by 6 frames per second, in a game where it's running at nearly 200 frames per second. So what? The i5 outright demolishes the Ryzen 5 in multi-threaded workloads, performing over 50% faster in Cinnebench, a test AMD typically does well in. Even in single-core performance, the i5 is 22% faster than the Ryzen 5, a result not reflected in the games tested today. However, that difference will matter over the next 3 years. The single biggest problem that the i5 has is the crushing cost of the motherboards. At launch, the only motherboards available are Z690, and they are expensive. To get a decent one requires spending over $200. Good B550 motherboards for the 5600X are available for under $150. Now this brings me to the recommendations part of the video. First, let me say that both are incredible products that provide solid performance for most users, and if the typical PC user were to buy either of them, you will likely be very happy. Also, prices change over time, so be sure to check the links in the video description to Newegg, Amazon, and eBay for the latest prices. Now, those are affiliate links, and using them supports the channel at no extra cost to you, so if you found this helpful, useful, informative, please consider clicking those links before buying something. It supports the channel, and we are greatly appreciative. Second, if you have to buy an all-new platform, including CPU, motherboard, RAM, etc., then the choice is easy. i5-12600K all day long and twice on Sunday. It is faster in single-core performance. It's faster in multi-core performance. It's on a new platform that has at least one solid CPU upgrade path in front of it, more on that in a second, and it's priced very close to the 5600X. Enough so that, in my opinion, the difference isn't worth the fuss. If you are going to go the i5 route, right now a DDR4 motherboard in the $200 to $300 price range makes the most sense. DDR5 is ridiculously expensive right now. It is not massively faster than DDR4, at least on the specs. I have not done enough testing to tell you that, but my gut is that it isn't worth it right now. My personal favorite is the ASRock Z690 Extreme because it has all the right features for a solid price. DDR4 RAM support, 2.5 gig Ethernet LAN, ALC1220 audio, 13-phase power delivery, 3 M.2 slots for NVMe drives, and so much more. I personally ordered one from Newegg for DDR4 testing and to build a complete Alderlake PC with, so expect those soon. However, if you already have an AM4 board, replacing it outright with Intel really doesn't make any sense, at least not this year. Unless you are stuck with an ultra-cheap, low-end B350 first-gen board with zero features, you likely can upgrade to at least a Ryzen 7 3700X or a Ryzen 5 5600G or 5600X with a simple chip swap, perhaps a new CPU cooler, along with a BIOS update, of course. Even if Alder Lake is faster, it's not so much faster that rebuilding your PC is worthwhile if you're already on the AMD platform. Finally, there is always the option to wait until next year. Intel has Raptor Lake coming, not confirmed, but they do, in the third quarter of 2022, and AMD has Zen 4 coming on the AM5 platform, hopefully at the very end of 2022. There's always something new around the corner, so if these results aren't enough, both companies will have new stuff out soon enough. So what is the TLDR of all of this? What CPU would I personally buy? Neither one of them. I would buy the i7-12700K because for $130 more than the 12600K, you get 2 more P cores, faster out-of-the-box clock speeds across the CPU, more on-chip cache, and a longer overall system life due to that extended performance. It will last some period of time longer than the i5, and if it buys you an extra year, that saves you from a big upgrade. Sure, just counting the cost of the CPU itself, the i5 is, full stop, the deal. The extra money isn't worth it if you're only counting that $130. However, by the time you've bought a $250 motherboard, RAM, SSD, power supply, case, cooler, etc., what's another $130? Now, normally $130 might step you up to the next class of GPU. That's a common answer. Well, use that $130 and buy a better graphics card. Sure. Have you seen the price of graphics cards today? I'm filming this in 2021. If you're watching this in 2023 and video cards are reasonably priced, awesome. But right now they're ridiculous. And $130 does not step you up to the next graphics card. The gap between them is much larger. Now, I ordered an i7-12700K for my own testing and to build a working PC with. Intel was kind enough to send me the i5-12600K, and they sent me the i9-12900K for the launch testing. They didn't send me the i7-12700K, which ironically is the one I think is the best deal. Now, I'm saying this not having tested it. However, I have done a lot of testing for a lot of years. I've played with the i5, I've played with the i9, and I can draw a line in between the two and figure out where it's going to be. The extra $200 that the i9 costs over the i7 for basically 4 more E-cores and the same P-cores and a small clock speed boost is really only worth it for RTX 3090 owners who are not price sensitive. Otherwise, I'm inclined to skip the i9 this time around and go for an i7. If the price gap shrinks in the future, that advice will change. But for the moment, I think the i7-12700K is the sweet spot. Follow-up videos to this will come testing both the i7 and i9 CPUs, comparing them to the Ryzen 7 and Ryzen 9. After that, I'll do generational testing to show performance relative to the 7700K, 8700K, and 9900K. I will not bother with the 10850K because, of course, if you just built that, keep it and enjoy it. If you have something older than the 7700K, it very much is time to upgrade if you're running new software. Thank you all so much for watching to the very end. 2 gold stars for all of you. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you love it. Remember, subscribe to the channel with the big huge red button directly below. Hit that bell notification icon if you'd like to be notified when the videos actually come out. There is a video description down there. You will find links to Newegg, Amazon, and eBay. One of the best, easiest, and free ways for you to support the channels you love, which hopefully includes us if you're still watching this, is to use those links before you buy anything. Yes, including jars of peanut butter. Hitting that link, anything you buy during that browser session counts towards it. It's an affiliate commission to us, and it is a great, great way to support the channels that you like. If you want to further engage with us, hit the join button next to the subscribe button, and for $2 a month, become a member of the Deal Nation. You get access to more than a dozen private chat channels over on the Tech Deals Discord, also linked down in the video description below. I am on the Discord every single day, and it's the single best way to ask questions and otherwise engage with me and our most dedicated members of our community. Thank you very much for watching this very long video. It's greatly appreciated, and I will see all of you next time.